Imagine being trapped in a world of concrete and steel with no way out. With grit, determination, and a will to survive, these inmates clawed their way out of the depths of despair and into the light of freedom. Join us as we delve into the clandestine world of prison escapes, where the shackled don't merely run, they dig.
It was April 25th, 2011. Summer was close. But while for most Westerners, summer means nothing more or less than a great opportunity for vacation, there are people in this world with other priorities for the season. In the spring of 2011, the Taliban were getting ready for the upcoming fighting season in Afghanistan. The Taliban is an Islamic fundamentalist and militant movement in Afghanistan, which emerged in 1994 as a prominent faction in the Afghan Civil War. The group ruled almost the entire Afghanistan for 5 years, between 1996 and 2001, before being toppled by the United States and its allies. The Taliban recaptured Kabul, the country's capital, in 2021, and have since implemented their incredibly restrictive policies. In other words, they don't really believe in human rights, but no other country in the world believes in their government either. Before regaining control over Afghanistan, though, the Taliban fought hard and dirty for years. The Sarposa prison escape is just one example of their dangerous actions. With the fighting season so close, the Taliban needed reinforcements. And what better way to get fresh soldiers than to help hundreds of sympathizers escape prison? In April 2011, the Sarposa prison in Kandahar was housing some 500 Taliban, all held in the prison's political section. The highest profile Taliban inmates were held at a facility outside of Bagram Air Force Base in eastern Afghanistan, while other key prisoners were held by the Afghan government in a high-security wing of the main prison in Kabul. Even though these men were generally considered a low-grade Taliban, they were still dangerous and more than eager to resume fighting for their cause. At that point, by April 25th, some of them had been serving for years, but the tide was turning. They could feel it, even though they had no official information from their superiors. But they knew that, only a few weeks before, a Taliban suicide bomber had managed to blow up Kandahar's police chief. Another suicide bomber had come close to killing Afghanistan's defense chief right in Kabul. All they had was their undying faith in their cause, but what they also had was a not-so-strict prison, with guards that would smoke marijuana and heroin on a daily basis and then fall asleep without a worry in the world. Perhaps that's why many of the prisoners weren't too surprised by the events of early Monday morning, April 25th. There were only 3 or 4 people in the entire prison who knew what was about to go down. Months before, they'd managed to get copies of the prison keys. An important detail, they needed to make sure that they'd be able to open their cells. It was just before midnight when the plan was finally greenlit. The prison building was quiet, shrouded in darkness. Everyone was asleep. Well, almost everyone. The 3 men started waking up their fellow prisoners. They worked quietly, but efficiently. They knew they had to. Breaking almost 500 Taliban out of jail can't be easy work. They decided to wake up the prisoners in groups of 4 or 5. This way, they figured, there wouldn't be that much racket. Not that the prison guards would necessarily react even if there was. There was another reason they needed to work with small groups only. The tunnel could get crowded, and oxygen was limited. Yes, a tunnel. It had been 5 months in the making, but none of the Taliban inside the prison, nor the Afghan officials, knew anything about the tunnel. For months, a group of 18 insurgents from outside the prison had dug and burrowed thousands of feet underground. In order to avoid drawing suspicion on the huge mounds of brown soil, the insurgents sold truckloads of the earth in Kandahar's bazaar. Everything about the escape had been thoroughly planned. So in order to keep things running smoothly, only a few people were woken up at a time. Each group walked quietly, room by room, until they reached a cell with a hole in the cement floor. The opening was about 3 feet in diameter. After a 5-foot drop, the prisoners had to walk some 1,180 feet in order to reach the other side, where the tunnel opened in a house. Sections of the tunnel were lit with electric lights. There were also fans, which ventilated the space. It wasn't an amateur creation. The Taliban had worked for 5 months in order to get it ready, and they had assistance from engineers. The tunnel led from the prison's political wing to a house southwest of the prison, which had been previously rented by the Taliban. In fact, the house had been searched by authorities only 2 months before the escape, maybe because of its close proximity with the prison, but authorities had somehow failed to find the entrance to the tunnel. Everything ran smoothly. Group after group went in the tunnel and came out on the other side. The guards were probably fast asleep. Nobody had any clue about what was happening inside the prison. Still, the Taliban were ready to retaliate if needed. They placed suicide bombers inside the house. Each of them was ready to fight and sacrifice themselves if it meant the others would escape. After reaching the house, the escapees were taken in vehicles to a safe place of the Taliban. Almost 500 Taliban were broken out of Sarposa prison. The whole operation took 4.5 hours. At about 4 o'clock on Monday morning, a single prison guard wandered into the prison's political wing. But to his astonishment, the entire section was empty. 500 people were gone, but not without a trace. For some reason, the prisoners had left their clothes, shoes, and turbans behind. Authorities were alerted, and the investigation began. Mohammed Tahir, the head of the team investigating the escape, immediately thought that the escape had been aided by several prison guards. The Taliban were quick to claim the escape and even brag about it. They provided the details of the escape, relishing in their success and their wit. Toyalai Wessa, the governor of Kandahar, publicly stated that security forces had failed in their duty. Wessa also said efforts were already underway to recapture the prisoners. Some of the escaped prisoners have been recaptured by security forces during searching operations, and huge operations have launched inside and on the outskirts of Kandahar city for the rest of them, he said. The shame of this escape was made even more bitter by the fact that it wasn't the first of its kind. 3 years prior, in June 2008, the Taliban had managed to break out 870 inmates from the same prison. That time around, they had used a suicide bomber to break a hole in the prison in order to free the prisoners. This is a blow, presidential spokesman Wahid Omar said after the prison escape. A prison break of this magnitude of course points to a vulnerability. The magnitude of the event was even greater considering it had all happened under the noses of Afghan and NATO officials. To make matters worse, the Taliban said they had freed more than 500 of their fellow insurgents and that about 100 of them were commanders. 4 of them were former provincial chiefs. The security around the prison was enhanced after the escape. The Afghan uniformed police also established a checkpoint directly across the highway from the prison, directly above the tunnel exit. But the escape was a big blow to the Afghan authorities, with suspicions about government officials and their inability to protect civilians skyrocketing. At least 71 of the escaped prisoners were allegedly recaptured, though the numbers aren't exactly confirmed. As of 2021, the Taliban are once again ruling over Afghanistan. They swore to bring about a truly Islamic state, and they also expressed their desire to have good relations with the United States. But their idea of an Islamic state and good relations with the rest of the world doesn't necessarily seem to involve the pledge to protect human rights. As the sun set on a summer evening in upstate New York, an eerie silence fell over Clinton Correction Facility. A maximum security prison nestled in the small town of Dannemora was known for housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the state. But on this night, something was different. The guards patrolling the prison walls had no idea that 2 of their most notorious inmates were plotting their escape. Richard Matt and David Sweat, both serving life sentences for murder, had been digging their way out of their cells for months. And as the darkness descended upon the prison, they were ready to make their move. Richard Matt was a career criminal who had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. He was born in Tonawanda, New York in 1966 and had a troubled childhood. He turned to a life of crime at an early age, and by the time he was in his 20s, he had been convicted of several crimes, including kidnapping, assault, and robbery. In 1997, Matt was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the kidnapping and murder of a businessman. He was transferred to the Clinton Correction Facility in 2008, where he was serving a sentence. David Sweat, on the other hand, was a convicted killer who was serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He was sentenced to life in prison in 2003 for the murder of a sheriff's deputy. The escape of Richard Matt and David Sweat from the Clinton Correctional Facility in 2015 was a carefully planned and executed effort that lasted several months. In planning their escape, Richard Matt and David Sweat considered several factors, including the prison's layout, the location of the guards, and the routines of the prison staff. They had studied the prison's security measures and were aware of its weaknesses, which they exploited to their advantage. The 2 convicts worked on their escape at night, when the prison was quieter and less active. They used soundproof walls and coverings to muffle the noise of their drilling and sawing. They also had to be careful to avoid detection by the guards and cameras, which required precise timing and coordination. Their first step was to gain access to the prison's maintenance tunnels, which they accomplished by cutting through their cell walls with power tools. Once they were in the tunnels, they made their way through the maze of pipes and vents until they reached a manhole that led to the outside of the prison walls. To get through the manhole, Matt and Sweat used hacksaws and other cutting tools to break through the metal grates that covered it. They then crawled through the small opening and emerged outside the prison walls. From there, the two inmates made their way to a nearby train station, where they had stashed a car that they had stolen from a prison employee. They then drove the car to a nearby town where they split up and went their separate ways. The escape was discovered on the morning of June 6, 2015, when prison guards did a head count of all the inmates during the morning roll call. When they got to the cells of Richard Matt and David Sweat, they found that they were empty. At first, the guards assumed that the two men might have been transferred to another facility, or that they were in the infirmary, but a further investigation revealed that they were nowhere to be found. A search of the prison grounds was immediately initiated, and it was soon discovered that the two men had cut their way through the back of their cells and into a series of tunnels and pipes that led to a manhole outside the prison walls. The manhole cover had been lifted, indicating that they had escaped through it. It quickly became clear that the two men had planned their escape meticulously and had taken great care to cover their tracks. However, they made one critical error. They failed to cover up the manhole after they had emerged from it, which made it easy for authorities to discover how they had escaped. After their escape, Richard Matt and David Sweat left a sarcastic note for the prison guards that included a happy face and read, "Have a nice day." The note was found near the pipe that the two men had used to break out of the prison, and it added insult to injury for the prison staff who were already reeling from the audacious escape. The note hinted at the brazen confidence of the escapees and the extent of the planning that went into their escape. The discovery of the empty cells and the manhole led to a massive manhunt that lasted for 3 weeks and involved hundreds of law enforcement officers from multiple agencies, including the New York State Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the U.S. Marshal Service. Helicopters and canine units were used. The search covered a large area of upstate New York and parts of Vermont and Canada. The authorities also offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the fugitives. After the escape, Richard Matt and David Sweat spent several weeks in the surrounding areas of the prison, attempting to evade the authorities. They stole food, clothing, and camping gear from local hunting cabins and continued their journey deeper into the wilderness. At one point, they were spotted by a passing motorist, but the witness did not recognize the escapees and did not report the sighting until days later. Matt and Sweat also broke into a number of vacation homes and seasonal camps, stealing supplies and leaving behind clues to their whereabouts. Despite the extensive manhunt that was underway, the two men managed to elude the authorities for over 3 weeks, traveling almost 25 miles through the dense Adirondack forest. They made their way to a remote area near the Canadian border, where they were eventually tracked down by a team of U.S. Marshals. The men were located in a makeshift campsite, surrounded by discarded food wrappers and other evidence that they had been living in the area. The manhunt came to an end on June 26, when a U.S. Customs and Border Protection tactical team spotted Richard Matt in the woods near the Canadian border. He was shot and killed by a U.S. Border Patrol agent after he refused to surrender. David Sweat was captured 2 days later near the town of Constable, New York, after being spotted by a New York State trooper. He was shot and captured after he refused to surrender and fled from the trooper. The investigation into the prison break revealed a shocking level of complicity and corruption within the Clinton Correctional Facility. It was discovered that the two men had received assistance from a prison employee named Joyce Mitchell, who had agreed to be their getaway driver after their escape. Mitchell, who was a supervisor in the prison's tailor shop, had become close to the two men and had helped them obtain tools and other materials that they used in their escape. She later changed her mind about being their getaway driver and failed to show up at the agreed-upon location. Mitchell was charged with facilitating the escape and was sentenced to up to 7 years in prison. The investigation also revealed that the two men had used power tools to cut through the walls of their cells and the pipes in the tunnels. The tools were believed to have been supplied by Mitchell and another prison employee named Gene Palmer. Palmer, who was a corrections officer, had been suspended and later resigned from his job. He was charged with promoting prison contraband and tampering with physical evidence. The New York prison escape of Richard Matt and David Sweat was a major embarrassment for the state and sparked calls for reform and improvements in the state's prison system. The incident highlighted the need for increased security measures and better employee screening procedures, as well as the need for better training and support for prison staff. After the escape of Richard Matt and David Sweat, the Clinton Correctional Facility made several security adjustments. including installing new cameras and creating an escape-proof cell block. They also hired additional staff, including guards and security personnel, to increase security presence. These measures were implemented to prevent future escapes and ensure the safety of everyone within the prison. In conclusion, the New York prison escape of Richard Matt and David Sweat was a major event that captured the nation's attention and raised serious questions about the security and management of the state's prisons. The escape was the result of a combination of factors, including a lack of proper security measures, corruption and complicity among the prison employees, and the cunning and determination of the two convicted murderers. The manhunt that followed was a testament to the dedication and determination of law enforcement officers from multiple agencies who worked tirelessly to bring the fugitives to justice.